Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session. We're going to get started here in just about 1 minute, just giving people a moment to get into the room. But if you are looking for the art and science of Alpine route finding and navigation, you are in the right place. So we will get started here in just about 1 minute. All right, then we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone to today's program. I'm pretty happy to see really good turnout today. This is a topic that I think is, really quite important in the Colorado and 14er community. And it's not something that there are a ton of resources for, when it comes to route finding and navigation here in sort of an alpine environment, which is very different from, other places you may explore. So we're going to dig in here for the next, about 55 minutes and learn some good foundational skills here when it comes to climbing or scrambling in a mountain environment. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We do have the Q&A feature turned on today. So if you have a question during the program, either right now there's something specific you're curious about, feel free to throw that in the Q&A. Or as we're going through it, if a question pops up, you can put it in there. If it makes sense to do so, I try to stop and answer questions in the moment, when it's relevant. And if not, I'll hold on to questions for the end, and we'll have about a 5 or 10 minute period to answer any more questions you have. I pretty much stay online as long as it takes to answer all the questions. So with that, I'm going to just give a little bit of background about who I am and why I'm here. My name is Alex, and I work with the Next Summit, which is a mountain blog for all that I founded several years ago. Our focus and our goal really is to bridge the gap between excitement, and energy around outdoor recreation, specifically in the mountains, with responsible stewardship, safety, leave no trace, and conservation. And we do this primarily using digital online tactics. So, this webinar program is one way that we work to educate the public. We also create resources. We conduct advocacy. We're very involved right now in getting the sort of Decalibron closure issue settled. So those are some of the things that we do to help support the outdoor recreation community. If you're curious about us and our mission and what we do, you can learn more at any time by just going to thenextsummit.org. As far as I go, though, my name is Alex Derr. I'm founder of the Next Summit. I got it started back in about, I want to say it was 2018, after coming down Long's Peak near or within the national park, I would say. And I was shocked to see like a Congo line of people essentially marching up into a developing thunderstorm, just completely oblivious, of the danger they faced and the risk they were putting themselves in. And so I came home that night and, decided something had to be done and just started blogging to see what I could do. And at the time, I didn't really expect it to go anywhere. But today we've really grown. We're doing a lot of great work. I've been hiking my whole life. I'm an Eagle Scout. I've had a master's degree in environmental policy from CU Denver. And I have spent a lot of time climbing out here in Colorado. With over 65, it actually might be 70 now, ascents above 13,000 feet, hundreds of days camping, lots of rock climbing and the rest. But really, again, what gets me excited the most is being able to share outdoor education with all of you. So thank you for that opportunity, as well as to advocate for these peaks and these places that we love. So thank you for joining me today. Our learning objectives. So there's sort of like four big goals I have for everyone in terms of what you'll take away. So first, we just have really understanding what Alpine route finding and navigation are, because these words get thrown out all the time, but it's not common for us to actually sit down and define them. We're also going to talk about how to plan ahead and research and prepare for your climb from a navigation perspective. We'll discuss common tools and resources that you use, really with a focus on 14ers and 13ers, but these are, tips that are applicable in any mountain environment. And then lastly, we'll share some specific best practices and skills, with really an emphasis on being practical, things that you can use right away to become a better route finder and navigator. One theme that I will be repeating, though, a lot today is that route finding and navigation really are skills. And like any skill, you can learn about them in a classroom environment like we are here, but you can't master them really without getting out there and practicing that skill, right? You can't learn to play the piano just by listening to someone talk to you about playing the piano. So I hope to provide you all with a great foundation of information and resources that you can then take out into the mountains, with partners, following safety, best practices, and really develop those skills. So we will go ahead and jump in. So just to get everyone on the same page, the first thing I want to cover are these things. That this is the skill of determining the safest and most efficient path to ascend or descend mountainous terrain that lacks established trails. And that's key, right? The lack of a trail, because if there's a trail and you're simply following it, I wouldn't call that route finding. That I think is the sort of central difference between, taking a walk through a city park and trying to climb a 14er. There's a lot of different things that involve. Some of the big ones are, interpreting natural landmarks, like to use as markers, understanding the terrain features around you so you can determine which of them are more difficult and which are easier. And most of all, being able to make these real-time decisions out in the backcountry itself, navigating this terrain. It's not something where you can go in and have a preset, 100% certain route and you just go, ABC. You really are going to be making a lot of real-time determinations and updates. So it's really crucial, especially when you're dealing with risky terrain where there's rockfall, exposure, and other alpine hazards. Very similar, but a little bit broader, is alpine navigation. So this is like the broader skill set that includes route finding. That's sort of like the micro inversion, when you're literally deciding, do I go 10 feet to the left or 10 feet to the right? Navigation is a bit bigger in scale. It's more about mapping out the entire route, creating a plan beforehand, preparing with a map, ensuring that you stay on that plan as you're out in the field, and that you get home safely. So it involves, looking at topographical maps, using GPS, executing your plan in the field, and being able to, stay situationally aware. So you catch if you're, for example, leaving the trail on accident, or you catch if you've missed a key milestone marker and you need to backtrack. So both skills are really critical, and they're really quite complementary, because without a good foundation on navigation, you're not going to be able to get to the point where route finding becomes important. And of course, without route finding, you can't navigate. It's a central element. So hopefully that sort of explains and differentiates the two. In terms of how alpine navigation, though, is unique, what's different about it from other places, I already said that probably the biggest one is this lack of established trail, right? That, when you get a route, when you look up route information on, 14ers.com or something, you'll get a map, and that map is helpful. But if you think about it, the width of a route line on a map, while it might, look very small when you're looking at the map, the amount of space it takes up, in the real world, so to speak, is like 300 feet wide, right? And so, yes, that the right way to go is somewhere within that 300-foot range, but that's where route finding is key. There's a lot of complex and rugged terrain out here. You can see a photo of this climb we did recently. It's really a literal pile of boulders. There really isn't any kind of dirt or mud or a path to follow. The weather, of course, in an alpine environment is extremely variable, which means you can't necessarily trust that you'll be able to have visibility, right? It's not a good idea to only navigate by sight alone, because I've been in many situations where, even in like September or August, a chaotic little storm dropped in and suddenly it was snowing and, we had pretty much whiteout visibility. That can happen in any month of the year in Colorado. So weather's a big one to be, it's kind of like just an extra wild card thrown in. Altitude related challenges specifically refers to how it influences our decision making and critical thinking. The higher up you go and the less air you have, it sort of makes sense that your brain gets a little bit sluggish. We are, it's easier for us to take shortcuts, and probably most importantly, it's really easy to become complacent and to sort of lose your situational awareness. So taking the time to get ready for the altitude, we're not really going to focus on that today, but that is definitely a good best practice to ensure that you're not overly sluggish or slow when it comes to thinking through things. And then lastly, if you get lost in a city park, you could probably pull out your cell phone and call for help. But when you are out on a 14er, if you get lost off route, you might not be able to call for help unless you have a satellite phone or something. So those are just some of the ways why this is a really unique skill set in an alpine environment, and it really is quite different than other forms of hiking or backpacking. The biggest reasons, though, that this skill is worth mastering. One, I think the obvious reason everybody knows is that you're going to be safer. If you can stay on track, you're going to stay on safer terrain. Your chance of getting lost is far smaller, and your chance of an injury is smaller as well. But I think the second piece is one that people don't think about, and it's I think much more of the like day-to-day reason why navigation is important, because most people, whether you are good at navigating or not, most people won't get lost, right? That's just a matter of statistics and odds. But everyone, or pretty much everyone, will become way more efficient and faster at climbing if they can become a good navigator and route finder. And just an example of this, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was talking to someone, and they had been climbing Gray's Peak. It's an easy class 2 14er near Denver. And they were coming down and they saw a guy down below them who had pretty much left the formal trail and was just trying to cut down the switchbacks over these like rugged boulders, essentially. And clearly he thought he was making a shortcut, right? Instead of going like this, he was just kind of cutting straight down. But because it took him so long to scramble over those rocks safely, my friends who I was talking to, he was easily able to pass by him and get down to the saddle way before he did, because he stayed on the trail, because the easier terrain really does speed you up. So if you can become a competent route finder and ensure you stay on trail, you're going to save a ton of energy. You're going to save a lot of time, which increases your chance of successfully summiting or reaching your destination. So it's just a pragmatic benefit. The third thing is always helpful. If you're a route finder, if you're a navigator and you have these tools, you're going to be able to adapt to these changing conditions better. So things like if you come across a route that rockfall has altered and you have to sort of in that moment decide what to do, or again, if like clouds or snow move in and suddenly you can't rely on just navigation by sight alone. And then lastly, a fun fourth reason: when you become a really, really good route finder, it becomes very fun to impress your friends. You get to be the guy, hiking along and pointing out where everyone should go. So those are just a few good reasons to stick with us here and master these skills. So the first thing I wanted to cover, we're going to talk about three different ways that alpine terrain differs. And so the first way is really from the climbing scrambling perspective, which is sort of a difficulty scale, right? This is called the Yosemite Decimal System, and it's comes out of the rock climbing community in Yosemite National Park in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so it essentially uses these 5 class scales to describe how difficult the climbing is on any given route. So on the left is the easiest type of terrain. We've got class 1, and there are 6 14ers, for example, that are class 1. And that's just hiking on a path or an established trail. So as you can see in the photo, it's pretty obvious where you're going in front of you. Class 1 peaks, though, can still be, they can still be hard to navigate, especially, like I said, if you're dealing with variable weather conditions or things like that. So just because it's class 1 doesn't mean you should necessarily, throw your hands up and do nothing. Definitely preparation still makes sense. Class 2 is simple scrambling. So this is the top of Mount Bierstadt here. And this is where you're essentially just using your hands and your feet. You're no longer at a trail, you're just on some kind of rock. But you're not going up the rock so much as you are going across it, right? It's essentially well below a 45-degree angle. You can see in this photo, for example, that they are ascending, but it is not a very steep ascent. It's not at all a wall like you would in rock climbing. So simple scrambling is pretty easy. You're really just using your hands for balance, and the chance of a fall or a serious injury is still very low. There's a big jump up, though, in the risk level between class 2 and class 3. Class 3, this is Long's Peak. I believe this is actually up at the choke stone at the top of the a trough gully. And this is where things get a little sketchier. I define this as being complex scrambling. So you're still using your hands and feet, but as you can see here, she's actually using her hands a bit to pull herself up. This is no longer primarily horizontal. It's sort of equal, forward and equal up. So at this point, you still don't need ropes or anything like that, but a helmet starts to become important because rockfall can, rain down on you, especially from other climbers. So this is the point where people start to take things really quite seriously. Class 4 is the most difficult of the 14er standard routes, and this is essentially just simple climbing. It's a place where you are rock climbing, but for whatever reason, either because of the quality of the rock or the just the type of terrain you're on, it doesn't make sense to use a rope or a harness. So this is actually, in my opinion, the most dangerous level, because if you fall in class 4 terrain, like the maroon bells here, you're probably not going to make it. It's going to be several hundred feet, and you don't have a rope to stop that fall. Class 5 routes, these are sort of the formal rock climbing routes that you probably think of when you see, someone using a rope and a harness. There are no 14ers that have like a mandatory class 5 route, like that's the only way to get up it. But there are many 14ers that do have a non-standard class 5 route. So for example, Long's Peak, the easiest route is a class 3. But on the Diamond, which is the eastern face, there are dozens of class 5 climbing routes. So, always take time to make sure you know what the class rating is of the climb you're looking at, because from a route finding perspective, it gets much harder the higher up you are. There's more going on. You're more exhausted. And the risk is higher. If you get off terrain, and in class 2 terrain, it's annoying, but it's not really a danger problem. Whereas if you get, wander off a class 2 area and you get into class 4 or class 5 areas, now you're in serious danger. So, this is a good place to start if you're trying to pick a route at the difficulty level you're at. Some other mountain features that often come up in route descriptions and in route guides are these 5 I chose. First, we have couloirs. Couloirs, I love the name. It's a French term. It's essentially a big gully, right? It's a big crack down the mountainside that typically gathers snow that'll stick around late into the season. So This is a good example of a couloir in like the late spring season. In Colorado, they're usually free from snow by like the late summer. So couloirs are tricky because a lot of routes have them, but the conditions change dramatically. You know, if there's snow there, you're going to need crampons. Sometimes there could be a mix of rock, snow, and ice. Sometimes it's just rock, and then it's often very, very loose, and the risk of rockfall is higher. So, you know, a lot going on with couloirs. Saddles are essentially a low point on a ridge between two peaks. So here you can see that this is kind of a wide, long saddle. But these are extremely common on 14ers, and often one of sort of the key milestones on your route will be reaching a saddle from where you go up the final ascent up to reach the ridge. So as an example with Mount Bierstadt here, this photo is taken from a saddle right below the final ridge ascent. So good thing to know. Third, cirques are essentially like an amphitheater shaped or theater shaped depression, I guess you could say. And it's the remains or what's created by the last remnants of a glacier. So at the time when the glaciers were here and filled up these valleys, it would have kind of ended up at the highest point up here and created this sort of bowl shape. So cirques are often pretty rugged and steep because, literally it's where the glacier was carving away the rock wall. But often on routes, you will have an ascent that cuts through a cirque wall. So again, something good to know. The fourth term here is an arete. And these are very common on class 3 and class 4 routes. These are very jagged, sharp ridge lines. There are a lot of broad 14er ridges, but these ones are sort of the opposite. They're very narrow, pointed, and difficult usually to climb. And then lastly, we have moraines. Moraines are a mound or a hill, but unlike the mountains that were, created by excavating them, sort of cutting away all the dirt and letting it erode, moraines are created by deposition. As a glacier carries all this rock down a mountain, eventually the glacier melts and it leaves piles of these rocks in that spot where they've melted. And so in most glacial areas of Colorado where there were glaciers, there's a ton of moraines around. So that's another term that gets used in route descriptions quite a bit. They'll tell you to locate the moraine to your left, or to, climb a ridge up a moraine. And so, yeah, having that knowledge of what that is going to help you find it on the map a lot easier. I am going to pause just to answer one question that we got from Anita. She said, can you tell from a map if and when you expect to run into class 4 or 5 areas? Good question. We will be looking at map reading here in a second, but just specifically on your question, it's pretty tough to be able to like definitively say that you're going to be in class 4 or class 5, mostly because of the detail, the fineness of the map compared to the real world. And what I mean by that is typically in a topographic map, the lines that show the different elevation levels, they're anywhere from 50 to 100 feet apart. But oftentimes in the mountains, you can just go, 15 or 20 feet and run into some class 4 terrain. It's very localized. And because the map isn't usually detailed enough, like fine grained enough, you won't be able to see those really little class 4 or class 5 spots. You'll only be able to see really large ones, So you might be able to see, for example, if you're going into a couloir, or if you're going to go near a cliff that is 1,000 feet high, that's going to show up at the topographic map. But if you are running into a class 5 wall and it's only 30 feet high, that might not show up on the topographic map because the lines aren't close enough together to show up, if that makes sense. So definitely I would always do your best to know, going into things based on route descriptions and reports from other people, what kind of terrain is around here and how hard is it, or rather how easy is it to accidentally get into tough terrain. That's usually information you can find online, and it's pretty helpful so that when you're out there, you kind of know what the risks are, and you have in the back of your head, here's the things to watch for. So I hope that answers your question. All right, so moving on, we're now going to look at one other sort of way to categorize alpine terrain, and this is based on the type of ground cover, right? Because in a forest, if you're hiking on a trail, essentially you're dealing with a trail, right? I mean, that's the ground cover is dirt. When it comes to 14ers, the terrain is all over the place. It can be little pebbles, massive boulders, slabs, snow, and all of it's quite different. So knowing what to expect with this different type of terrain is going to help you navigate it and get through it much easier. It's also going to help you identify it because, again, oftentimes route descriptions will describe you, identifying a talus field up ahead, or looking for a permanent snow field and going to the left of it, right? So starting on the left here, we're kind of going from smallest to largest. Scree is essentially pebbles. It's little rocks smaller than your fist that cover a slope. That means they're pretty unstable, unfortunately. Scree is often mixed in with dirt and forms this really loose sort of pebble matrix. And it makes it easy to slide down. If you're going up pure scree on a slope, often you'll take one step forward and then slide half a step down, which really slows you down. So whenever you can, scree is something to avoid. There are some routes where there's a scree field or there's a gully that's filled with it and you just don't have an option. It's the only way up, it's the route. But if you know that isn't the case and you suddenly think you have to go across a scree field, maybe stop and pause and check where you are, because those aren't often where you go unless you have no other option. If you are doing those, generally the tips are to go slow, take your time. Trekking poles can be helpful for extra points of contact because it's really loose and easy to slide. The next option, the next type of rock is going to be talus. So talus is sort of like an intermediary sized rock. It's bigger than your fist, but smaller than a boulder. And so talus fields are often, pretty extensive. They form underneath cliffs. As the rock falls down from the cliff, it lands on this big field of deposits. They're pretty solid usually. The biggest problems with talus fields are that the rocks can sometimes shift on you. You can think it looks very stable, and then you step onto a rock and it flips or it twists or something, and it makes spraining an ankle pretty easy. So same thing again with talus, is to just carefully choose your footing, take your time through the field. If you can, try to find social trails or cairns that kind of mark the best way through, and don't rush it. The third type of rock here, rock cover, is a boulder field, which is like the biggest type of sort of amalgamated rock deposits. So boulder fields, there's a few famous ones, like for example, there's one below Long's Peak that is quite famous. It's literally called the Boulder Field. And boulders are, you're talking big old hunks of rock that are, anywhere from as big as a chair all the way up to like as big of a house or more. So boulder fields are typically the most stable of these three types of rock fields because they are so massive, they tend to settle. But again, keep your guard up, because in a rare case, they could shift. And obviously a boulder falling on you is a much bigger deal than scree or talus. The fourth type of terrain here are slabs. These are probably the least common that I run into, but they do happen. And it's just what it sounds like. It's bare, exposed rock on the mountainside. The steeper they are, the harder they are. And they're often sort of sneaky in that, you look at it and it doesn't look very steep, but then you get out there, especially on rock faces where there's not many cracks to use to kind of hold on to, and it can get very difficult very quickly. So an example of this, again, is on Long's Peak at the home stretch. There's sort of a series of slabs that you have to climb up, but thankfully there's also big cracks running down them, so you can use that to work your way up. Lastly, a lot of these peaks have snow fields that hang around deep into the season. And it's important to remember, don't go over a snow field unless you have the right equipment, right? In this case, that's my partner there. He's got crampons, ice axe, the whole, 9 yards. It's really easy to get out there and see a snowfield and see that it's essentially a shortcut, right? Like instead of having to go all the way around, you can sort of cut through it, because while it normally would have been too steep or too rugged, the snow kind of creates this nice platform with a walkway. Still fight the temptation if you don't have an ice axe, because you don't want to go for a slide. You can't see it in this case, but this slope essentially went on for another 600 or 700 feet. And if you slid down that, it wouldn't be a fun day at all. All right. At this point, we're going to get into maps and topography. And in general, I would say also just, preparation and planning ahead. Topographic maps are probably the best place to start when you are, planning your trip and you're deciding you need to get ready and look at the route. So you can find a topographic map on pretty much all of the major route guide websites or books, and we'll go through those in a bit. But definitely take the time to find one early on and review it. It's a good way to sort of get a high level overview of the route. Where are you starting? Where are you ending? What are some of the main milestones along the way, like river crossings, ridges, cirques, talus fields, all that kind of thing. One of the skills, though, that you need to develop to be really proficient at using a topographic map is something we call terrain association. And these photos are essentially demonstrating what terrain association is. It's the ability to look up at the environment around you. So let's say you're climbing this mountain and you look up and you see it. And then it's the ability to look down at your map and associate this mountain with a spot on this map and go, oh yes, I see this little circle here that represents the very top of this mountain. And some people, this comes very naturally. I admit that I never thought about this much until recently, because it just sort of came naturally to me as a kid. If it doesn't, it's something that you actually do have to practice, right? This is not necessarily obvious in terms of this saddle being represented by this hourglass shape. And so these are some of the most common patterns of topographic maps, but they're also simplified a lot. It gets more complex in the field when there are 30 mountains around you and you're trying to figure out, just by looking at these squiggly little lines, which is which. So one good practice method for terrain association, I tried this and it was actually kind of fun to do it with a group of friends, is to climb up to any good vantage point. It doesn't have to be 14, or it can just be an easy short hike in Boulder or in the foothills. But make sure you can get to a point where you can see the sort of surrounding area. And what you should do is take out a piece of paper and do this, a group, like each of you take your own piece of paper out and set a timer, maybe 5-10 minutes. And as accurately as you can, attempt to sketch a topographic map based on what you see around you. It's very difficult to do at first. I struggled a lot. And after the 10 minutes, hit the timer and then share your results with each other and see essentially, who got closest to the actual topographic map that you should definitely also bring along. You can also do that in the sort of the opposite way of starting with the map and trying to look out and identify which of the points are on, and then check yourself. But you can also just do this while you're hiking, literally pulling out your map, looking around you, identifying points, and trying to find those on your map. It's a skill that requires practice, and the more you do it, the more it will just become second nature. Now, GPS is definitely a helpful tool to bring with you in addition to a map. I see it all over the place now. It's pretty ubiquitous. But I do get worried sometimes that many people think that GPS is a complete replacement for a map, and it just simply isn't. And there's a lot of reasons why, probably the biggest one being that electronics are not foolproof. So, bring a map with you on all hikes or scrambles in alpine environments. I recommend bringing a like a waterproof map. There's a ton of different brands that make them. National Geographic is probably the best. Theirs is also tear-proof. And so, you might drop a GPS and shatter the screen, or you might forget to touch it, plug in the batteries and it dies. You might even lose signal if you're, really close to a cliff or in deep forested terrain, but your map will still work. So good reason to bring it. Lastly, a compass is a good idea. Most people don't need a formal orienteering compass. We are not going to be doing too much today on compass skills, simply because it's really a skill. It's something you guys have to go out and practice and do. So I definitely recommend that, doing some compass practice, but not necessarily something you can learn in a half an hour. But at a minimal level, a compass can be used to help orient yourself. And by that, we mean figuring out literally which direction are you facing, orienting the north, south, east, west direction. So, when you pull out your map, it's a good thing to double check and make sure that what you think is north is actually north. And a compass can be helpful for that. Your research of the route, though, shouldn't stop after you looked at the map. These are some other great resources to look at. Route descriptions online. They're very detailed. They've got maps and photographs. The photographs are probably the most helpful thing because you can actually start to get an idea of what the terrain looks like and do some of that terrain association even before you get out there in the field. Trip reports are sort of like the opposite side of the coin. They're more of a narrative style description of their trip. So often these people talk about, preparation, what gear they brought, the conditions they found, a lot of helpful stuff. So I like to read both of those because they sort of, one is very fact oriented on just where to go, and the other shares sort of like the human perspective on it. The third thing to take a look at are these condition reports. 14ers.com has some great condition reports for 14ers and even a lot of the 13ers, which are really short updates that have info on the current conditions like snow or the trail quality. And then lastly, remember to always validate your research. There was a time, when the only people sharing this info were mountaineers, and so it was all pretty good. But today there's a lot of people climbing, and not necessarily all of them are experts. So definitely validate your research by checking numerous sources. I recommend checking out always 14ers.com if you're on a 14er. For the 13ers, climb13ers.com is a great resource. I'm biased, but thenextsummit.org is another good resource. I've got a lot of route guides, and I'm trying to add more each month. And then, of course, summitpost.org is probably the most extensive resource of all, although I should warn you that some of the routes on Summit Post are notably less detailed than the 14ers or 13ers resources. So I usually will look at least at 2 different sources before I go. And if I'm doing something that's more like class 3 or class 4, often I'll look at pretty much every source I can get my hands on, because knowledge is power, and more information is better than less. This is a little traditional, but there are also really good route books you can get out there. The most famous is called Colorado 14ers, but there are a lot of other ones. There's a good one from the Colorado Mountain Club just called Colorado Scrambles. So those are both good options. One last note is when we're talking about alpine terrain, I always encourage people to avoid using all trails. It's tricky because when you Google something, when you Google a trail or a route, all trails almost always shows up first, simply because they're such a massive company and a massive presence. But when it comes to alpine routes, they typically just don't have enough detail or descriptions for you to be able to prepare properly. There was just a Denver Post article, I think like 2 days ago, talking about a search and rescue running into someone on class 3 terrain who said she thought it was going to be a hiking trail, all the way up to the summit. And of course, it's class 3. It's the kind of place where you need a helmet, and a fall could be fatal. So uh, start out the right way by getting accurate information at one of these dependable resources. So routes all come from somewhere. And that is usually someone planning it for the first time. A lot of the 14er routes are decades old, sometimes 100 years old even, when people took time and explored and essentially figured out what was the easiest way to get up this mountain. For a number of reasons, you might decide you want to try to plan your own route. This could be you're climbing a 13er or a 12er that is very remote, and it maybe just does not have any sort of official routes online that you can find. Or it could just be you've got that like wanderlust, sort of adventure bug, and you want to take a route no one's ever taken. I highly recommend that you only pursue this option once you are a very experienced Alpine navigator. It's a very difficult process to chart out an entire route. And they can often hide hazards like cliffs and mining ruins and things like that. So remember, there's no shortcuts. Don't chart out a new field, or chart out a new route in the field. That's even worse. But it happens every year, and usually it unfortunately leads to injuries or death. So, take your time, stick to routes that are already established while you learn. All right, so now for this last section, we're really going to focus on some of these in the field tips, techniques, and advice. The first one I'm focusing on is decision points. And by this, I mean, where along your route you are having to make turns, change direction, and just as just what it sounds like, make decisions about where you're going. Some tips for dealing with sort of decision points. First of all, when you're starting your route, I always like to identify the key points or milestones along the way, because this is literally, as you go, sort of your key guiding light in terms of like, what are you doing next? So as an example, creek crossings, saddles and ridges, large crags like summits, snow fields, boulder fields, roads, gullies. These can all be key points along your trail. And they don't necessarily need to be directly on the route. It could just be that, you become equal to a point that's far away, right? You see that you come up to a certain elevation line, or you hit a river that is directly off to your right. Those can all be helpful for, following as milestones. At each of these plans, or at each of these, decision points, key points, you can stop and essentially make a short-term plan on reaching the next one. And a helpful framework for this is just like, it's called like if-then decision making. And so the idea is if, you get up to a creek crossing, and that, or if you're supposed to reach a creek crossing, you can tell yourself, all right, I'm going to set off and I should, beginning to this creek crossing. If I reach the tree line, though, without crossing that creek, then I have probably wandered off course and I need to backtrack, right? So if then is essentially creating contingencies on, what you expect to see and what you should do if you don't. So if then thinking is a helpful framework, I think, for sort of stopping at each mile point and just giving yourself a plan on next steps. One common sort of mental, guide to use for navigation in a field is something called handrails and backstops. So the general idea is to use a linear feature, so something like a river, the tree line, a road, a hiking trail, a gully even, and use that in the case of a handrail as like a line that you can follow. A lot of trails do this naturally. They'll follow a river like this one here, this image on the right. You can see there's this little river or creek weaving between these hills. And the person is going to use that as a handrail to just stay on route and follow it as they go. The opposite is a backstop. It's essentially the idea that you are hiking along and that when you hit the river, that's when you need to change direction. And so you can do this with all kinds of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be even something physical. It could just be an elevation marker where, this is a topographic line rather than a creek. And you know that once you hit the 12,000 foot point, it's your time to go. So that is a good reason I will say it's nice to have either an SOS device or a compass or a GPS tool that has the ability to show your elevation, as you can more easily use topographical lines as backstops or as a handrail, which is very helpful because there are a heck of a lot more topographic lines on your map than there are creeks or roads. Another helpful technique is known as aiming off. And so this is essentially used when you're trying to find a specific spot that is along a line. So like, for example, you're trying to find a camp spot that is somewhere along a creek, but you're not 100% sure of exactly where it is. So essentially, because you don't want to miss it, let's say, as you can see on this little diagram here, you could go to the left of the target here, but you could also accidentally go to the right. And if you ended up in those spots, you wouldn't know, well, now what? Do I go left or do I go right? And you could spend a lot of time wandering around. Aiming off is essentially the idea that you purposefully aim off of your target. So you aim significantly to the left. And once you hit that line feature, in this case, a stream, you know for a fact, all right, now all I have to do is turn right and I will eventually hit my target. So aiming off isn't something that comes up very often, but when it does, it's pretty helpful. All right, so in terms of, in your head when you're climbing, situational awareness is pretty essential. And, there's a lot of definitions of situational awareness, but really it's exactly what it sounds like. It's being cognizant and conscious about where you are in the moment, rather than daydreaming or thinking about, the brewery that you're going to go to when you get down the mountain. It's about living and being in the present moment, rather than some other place or time in your head. This is very hard to do, especially when you've got thin air and you're exhausted. So I wanted to include some tips for trying to maintain that level of situational awareness, because if you're not paying attention and you're just walking down the mountain, following what you think is the route, it is extremely easy. Like the number of times I've done it is depressing. It's very easy to wander off route, and probably even more concerning, it's very hard to notice that you've gone off route. Sometimes you could be like literally climbing over boulders for 10 minutes and then suddenly you're like, wait, I didn't think there was a boulder at this spot, right? So 2 tips for doing this. One is just literally stopping every so often. It could be every water break. But I like to kind of do it in real time as I'm walking personally, and trying to like create a mental map in your head. Essentially, look at your topographic map. That's the foundation. And then look around and start filling in, the lines and the valleys and the summits with what you see around you. Oh, that peak over there up to the left, that's, going to be right on the map right there. It gives you something to sort of stimulate your head while you're thinking. And it also makes sure that you know exactly where you are pretty constantly. For those people who, like me, have ADHD or something, or they're not very good at focusing. I recommend literally, and this sounds silly, but just set a timer on your cell phone for every 15 or 20 minutes. And every time that goes off, stop, look around you, listen and think, and just make sure you are where you think you should be, and then reset the timer and keep going. And if you do that every 15 minutes, you don't have to stop for more than 10 seconds, 15 seconds. If you say, yeah, everything's right, I'm exactly where I should be. But it's better to do that up front than just sort of, blindly go along and hope everything works out. Some other last sort of general tips here. First of all, in general, when you're like, I'm not sure what to do here, try just to identify and then to follow the path of least resistance. This is probably the hardest part of route finding. The sort of more fine grain part of navigation, because oftentimes, just like I said, 5 or 10 feet of distance could separate very rugged class 5 terrain with much easier class 2 or class 3 terrain. And so um, it really does require sort of this subjective ability to look out and start to see paths ahead of you, and knowing based on previous experience, oh, that rock over there, that line climbing over those boulders, that's going to actually take longer than over here dealing with a very short section of scree and then more solid rock, maybe talus that looks very settled. That's not something you can just learn by reading a book. It's not something I can sadly just teach through a webinar. It does take time to develop. So that's probably my next action step or homework step after this webinar finishes. Get out there and do a class 2 peak and see if you can practice some of these skills and tactics, and think a bit more about the navigation as it's going. Another tip is to look for social trail segments that you can follow. They're not on all routes or pretty consistent everywhere, but most routes have some social trails, even if you've gotten past the point where like the official trail has ended. These can be hard to pick out, but really you're often looking for dirt patches or bare spots where people have been cutting up and down in that spot so many times that all the loose rock has sort of been kicked away. So like on this photo here, for example, you can see my partner there. This is sort of a social trail segment, unofficial trail segment we were following. This is actually the Middle Teton out in Grand Teton National Park, but this is one of many little segments we followed on our way up. A third tip is to watch for cairns. That's a little rock pile that can mark sections of the route, especially in rocky areas like this. People will, generally speaking, build small cairns over time just to mark out that path of least resistance. However, validation again is important. In this case, cairns are sometimes right and they're sometimes wrong. The bigger the cairn, generally speaking, the more you can trust it, but that is not always the case. It really does matter, on a case-by-case basis. So I like to say that cairns should be one of several things you use to navigate. In addition to your, for example, GPS or topographic map, or handrails or backstops, try to find at least one other thing that validates that, yes, this cairn is probably right. And then last but not least here, again, snowfields really can save time. They make it easier to cross over talus. You can just walk right across instead of having to pick your way over the rocks super carefully. However, they do require advanced gear. Never attempt to cut across a snowfield, especially if it's on a steep slope, without a helmet, crampons, ice axe, and mountaineering boots. You also need the ability to self-arrest. That means taking your ice axe and digging it into the snow or ice in a way that stops your slide if you end up sliding down the mountain. That takes a lot of practice and a lot of time to learn. So if those aren't skills or gear that you have, unfortunately, if you see a snowfield that looks like it's a shortcut, I would recommend skipping that shortcut and sticking to the dry path instead. So one person just asked, how do social trail segments align with leave no trace? That's a good question. It is sort of a gray area in the conservation world, I would say. When there is an established trail, let's say you're hiking along the Mount Bierstadt Trail, it's pretty obvious it's a full-on built trail. You will see some social trails, aka unofficial trails, that leave off from that main trail. And those are definitely not a great thing. Social trails cause a lot of extra environmental impact because they essentially allow people to access areas that were previously not easy to access, right? And so not only do you actually have this trail, but you usually start to see more garbage, human waste. People start to build campsites and cut down firewood, and they have this sort of exponential impact. And so closing off unofficial social trails, that's actually like one of the highest priorities of land managers, so that they can sort of stop, that spread of that impact in those new trail areas. However, when we're talking more about like these social trails in class 3 and class 4 areas where there is no official trail, and these little segments have just formed naturally because people are, taking the path of least resistance, they really are more like an official trail in the traditional sense. If anything, they're actually probably helpful because they help concentrate people's impact. Instead of 150 people knocking rocks down all over a gully, you're having every single person, right, or at least most people, follow along this very specific 4-foot, 3-foot wide corridor and limiting the impact to that one spot. And so, interesting question, but yeah, I wouldn't say using them or not using them really has a major leave no trace impact, other than to say you should never be purposefully trying to create a new social trail where there isn't one already. That doesn't really make sense, because if it is an easier route, if it is the path of least resistance, like I said, there probably already is a social trail there. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so I just have one last thing, and then we'll have about five or so minutes for some questions. But this is sort of in a worst case scenario. What happens if you get lost? If you have done one of the 15-minute timer checks and you look up and look at your map and look up and you're like, wait a minute, none of this looks right. The things you see in the map don't look like what you see about, ahead of you. You should see a mountain summit, and instead you see a valley. What do you do? Step one is to just remember this great acronym that search and rescue uses called STOP. So S stands for sit down, literally physically sit down, because a lot of people at this point start hyperventilating and freaking out and sort of taking impulsive actions that can get them into more trouble. So the first thing is to sit down and sort of calm yourself. Do breathing exercises if you need to get yourself a little bit under control. Next, you want to think, right? You literally want to pull out your map and do some thinking to figure out, okay, well, what was the last place where I knew for a fact I was on route, and where was that? Third, you can look around you and start observing things, and try to figure out, based on what you see around you, even though you're obviously not on the route anymore, where might you be? Because if you are pretty, get good enough at terrain association, given some time, you can usually figure that out. Once you figure out what one key marker is, for example, look for the tallest mountain on the map and try to look for the tallest mountain around you. Once you do that, things get easier. And then lastly, once you're done observing, you can figure out a plan for what you're going to do next. If you have, for example, a lot of confidence that you've figured out where you are on the map, you can try to backtrack and get back to the main route. If you don't know where you are, if you've looked, you've thought, you've observed, and you're still clueless, don't wander around aimlessly. At that point, it is really honestly better to sit down, call for help, and wait. Because by time you know for a fact that you're going the wrong direction, you could be way deeper into the mountains and cause yourself even more problems. So, search and rescue does recommend, if you're comfortable, trying to spend 1 to 2 hours trying to get back on trail. But at that point, if you're still lost, or you feel you're unsafe for any reason, that's the time to stop and call for help. All right, so kind of ran through a lot today, but in summary, Alpine route finding and navigation skills are much more involved than simply following a trail. Hopefully, that's sort of the biggest takeaway, that everybody has today, is that like this is a real skill, and it's not just going for a hike. You can bring the right tools to really give yourself a leg up on this, including a topographic map, GPS, and a compass. really navigation starts before you leave the house, because you should be researching your route in detail, by looking at route descriptions, route reports, photos, and ideally multiple sources. You can also sort of give yourself a big advantage just by understanding a lot of these various types of alpine terrain. So again, we went through, class 1 all the way through class 5, different types of climbing. We talked about the different types of alpine terrain, and ground cover that you're going to experience. So ranging from scree, little pebbles like, through to talus, boulders, big slabs, and then of course snowfields. And then lastly, we did discuss a few of these mountain features with some funny names that show up a lot in these descriptions. So things like aretes, which are those jagged ridges, and some of the others there. And then lastly, we just got these great, little tips and strategies for using out in the field, thinking about handrails and backstops when you identify linear features that you can either follow or use as a stopping point. Aiming off is a helpful strategy if you're trying to hit a specific point along a trail or a river or an elevation line, and you don't want to miss it. Key points and if-then plans, these are helpful sort of frameworks for breaking up the route into segments, and then creating a plan for essentially each of those segments on what you'll do based on various contingencies. And then lastly, it's important to stay situationally aware at all times. Try to stay present in the moment, so that you don't get lost. And of course, if you do and you can't get back on track, the best thing is to stop. Sit down, think, observe, and then plan. And if you do that, you will probably be in a much better place than you were before. Nick just asked, will these slides be available after the session? Yes, they will. I will get a copy of the slides as well as a full recording of the session. Usually I send that out within about 48 hours, a day or two of the session, once I get it all put together. But yeah, the slides, I should say, are generally a really nice resource to skim through and review from time to time, just to make sure you're on track and you keep these things sharp. So at that point, we went a couple minutes over. My apologies for that. But for those of you still on, if anybody has any other questions about navigation or route finding in an alpine environment, now is your chance. You can ask a question in the Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to answer. And if I don't have an answer, I'll do my best to get back to you with an answer as soon as I can. While y'all are writing down questions, though, I do have one last before you go ask. I always let people know. Our, like I said, goal is to educate people, ideally free of charge wherever we can, because a lot of these types of trainings cost hundreds of dollars if you go to something like the Colorado Mountain School, and it's just not accessible. And so what we do is to try to make this stuff readily available to the people who need it, prevent search and rescue missions, reduce impact, and keep people safe. So if you learned something today and you want to pay it forward, you want to help us do more of these programs, we would love to be doing this stuff in person out at trailheads and things like that. But we need the resources to do it. So this is all a side gig of mine, a hobby. I have a full-time job. But if you want to support this work, help us do more webinars, you can become a member of the next summit. We've got about 45 members at this point who help make this all happen. And you'll get a little bit of exclusive content and articles and stuff as my way of saying thanks. But don't feel obligated to do so. It is a nice way, though, to help be a little bit of a part of the solution when it comes to these issues, rather than the, I guess, contributing to the problem as some do. Let's see. One person did just ask if I cover stuff outside of Colorado. I do to an extent. I've got a good number of route guides for California and some for Wyoming up in the Teton range. But it is my goal over the next year and a half to do more coverage of issues, not just in Colorado, but really across the West. That's my sort of focus area. If you look at maps of search and rescue missions in the US, the vast majority of them are west of the Mississippi River, because of the scale, the ruggedness of the terrain and that sort of thing. And so that's where we've sort of identified we can make the biggest impact. So if you have questions about specific places you want information on or advice or a webinar in the future, definitely reach out and let me know. You can email me. I didn't put it on the slides. I should have, but I'll just put it in the chat. People can contact me if they have other questions or ideas for future webinars, things you want to learn about, at Alex Derr at thenextsummit.org. And we did get one other question here, so I can take a stab at this and then we'll probably call it for the night. So somebody just asked, how do terrain classes change in snow conditions? So for example, if you're looking at a snowfield like we were talking about, how would you rate that in terms of like difficulty rating? And so there is actually a different scale for snow situations. And forgive me because I'm looking it up the name right now. I want to make sure I give you the right name, but snow is typically used as a grading system. I'm just trying to find the right one here for you. But there's a few different rating systems. So like in Colorado, the one I see the most is simply a like angle rating, because snow, in terms of just being snow, the surface is pretty much, the same. Obviously, it can be very variable due to the weather, how fresh it is, how old it is. But it's not like there's class 1 through class 5 snow. All the key thing you're concerned about is how steep it is. If you're if you're on a slope that is nearly like this, it's very easy to fall. If you're on a slope like this, it's pretty easy. So a snow angle that is like 30% is considered sort of like a moderate level climb. And once you get up to like 40%, now you're looking at like a difficult, very steep snow climb. There are also some like European systems, since a lot of alpine climbing got sort of, that's where it was born. And so there's a French system that I'm not even trying to pronounce some of the terms, that breaks down routes that are like mixed rock and snow. So feel free, if you're curious about that, you can just search the French system or like snow scale, and that should come right up. Somebody asked about grading. Let's see here. Grading systems for like the stratovolcanoes out in Washington. So there's Mount Rainier. I've climbed Mount Shasta out in California. So yeah, these it depends on when you climb them, essentially. For example, I climbed Mount Shasta in June when it was still a what do you call it? When it's still pretty solid and snow coverage is very good. And so at that point, that would probably be rated according to the snow system and the snow slope grade that I was telling you about. If you climb later in the season, or you do one of the like ridge routes, which is rocky, there's pretty much no snow. Those are class 3 routes. And so it really does come down to, if you're doing a route that is totally on rock, it's going to be a Yosemite Decimal System grading system. And if you're on a route that is primarily snow, which Mount Rainier, Mount Shasta, a lot of those peaks fall under that category. Then you're going to look at things like the French system I was mentioning, and the snow angle. So good question. Mike just asked, he's curious what app I use on my phone. So great question. Typically, I do have, I have several apps, I guess, now that I think about it. I have the 14ers.com app for 14ers. That's my favorite one, because you get access to not just the topographic map, but also the route description itself and photos there. You can download that on your phone all before you get out in the field. And so it's nice if you, again, are not sure where you're supposed to be and you stop and pull it out, you can pull open those photos right there. And that's a huge benefit. But I also just will usually download the route GPX file from 14ers.com. You can download them from there, and I'll download that right onto my phone. But I really mostly rely on my Garmin InReach. It's a great device. Probably the only thing I didn't go over today that I'm just thinking right now that would have been nice to mention. A Garmin InReach is like a spot device, an SOS device you can call for help using a satellite signal. But it also uses that satellite signal to provide you GPS and mapping capabilities. So that's usually what I use because my cell phone eats up its battery really fast, and I can't communicate it with it. Whereas with the Explorer InReach, not only can I navigate with it, I can also send that link out to my partner or my mom, depending on whether my partner is with me or not. And they can actually look up, click that link, look up the map and see in real time where I'm moving along. And so, yeah, Garmin InReach, there's a subscription cost and they are pretty hefty initial price wise, but like it's an invaluable resource. Somebody mentioned how the snowpack is, a pretty important factor as well. And yeah, definitely is huge. We're mostly, the focus on today was more of rock like summer climbing conditions, but you're totally right. If you are planning on doing any like big snow climbs, like for example, those stratovolcanoes out in Washington, being up to date on avalanche training, having avalanche gear with you, and knowing those conditions is critical to stay safe. So great point there. One person asked for my email, and I'll just write out my email again. It's going to be in the webinar chat. It is Alex Derr, AlexDerr at thenextsummit.org. And there it is shared there. I do my best to answer questions. If I don't know the answer, I will always try to find someone who does for you or a resource. One or two other quick questions. Somebody asked any software or apps used to plan multi-day routes or climbs. Good question. I have not personally stumbled upon any apps for that specific use. Whenever I'm doing a multi-day climb, I'll just pull out a good old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet and use that to sort of break up the days of my climb. Sometimes I'll actually do it by hour, even. Just on where I'll be or what I expect to be doing, and that's been helpful for breaking that out. Oops, thank you. Yes, somebody pointed out that my chat did not go through because I was trying to send it accidentally to hosts instead of everyone. So there, now you should see my my email there. Oh, it's disabled. That's interesting. Well, what I will tell you is you will be getting an email from me with the recording here and slides, and that'll be coming from my email address. So once you get that, just shoot a reply. You can also go to thenextsummit.org, and my email address is right up at the top of the screen. It says something like, have a question, shoot us an email. So you can do that as well. One last question. Somebody asked about the Garmin 66i. This is, if you're not familiar with Garmin devices, this is essentially their replacement of the Garmin InReach Explorer. That's the device I use, and it's essentially a larger GPS unit that doesn't require you to pair it with your phone. The other big option is the Garmin InReach Mini, which is much smaller, so it's much lighter. But for most people, you have to pair it with your phone. My biggest advice there is just that, like, I didn't want to have to bother with using my phone out in the mountains. The pairing can be a pain, but most of all, as I've said, like, a cell phone just doesn't have much of a battery. And I do a lot of, overnight trips or multi-day trips where that would kind of be a struggle, and I would end up having just to use the mini screen quite a bit. And so The Garmin 66i is the most expensive model out there, because it is sort of self-sufficient, self-standing. It has a big GPS screen. It's actually larger than the Explorer one, so it's got better detail and it's easier to see it. And you're never going to have to like pair it with your phone ever. That is the biggest primary difference between the 66 and the Garmin InReach Mini, is just whether or not you primarily want to just use the actual tool, or you just want it to be sort of your satellite dish, which lets you then just do everything on your phone. So generally speaking, if you primarily do day hikes, if you're not backpacking, if you're not usually doing 2 to 3 day, backpacking trips or climbs, then realistically, the 66i is probably overkill, especially since you can rent those from a lot of different companies, for short-term use. And so, if you are going to do like a big backpacking trip once, it's probably cheaper to just go out and rent it that one time rather than spending, it's like $400 to $600. So that would be my suggestion there on the Garmin devices. Yeah, great question. All right, unfortunately, we're gonna probably have to call it there then. So I do hope that you all learned a lot today. Route finding and navigation is just a core part of Colorado, and even more broadly, mountaineering in America. And it's one of those things that there just aren't great resources out there for it. So let me know if you're have any strong feedback later on. It's always helpful for me to know what people enjoy, what they didn't, and what else they'd like to learn. So thanks everyone for coming. I will be sending out a copy of the slides and a copy of the recording in the next 48 hours, the next 2 days, so that you can watch this again at any time, to either just refresh things or, even go back through the training later on before you climb. So have a great rest of your night. And thanks so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.